For the first time in an entire console generation, a Zelda game has been released with an actual chronological story and the typical story beats we've come to know over the course of the series. Echoes of Wisdom presents its story in a pretty straightforward way. And while I really like the narrative of the game, it also is not exactly the deepest tale we've ever had. Well, on the surface, that is. Because there are some interesting twists and implications that the game doesn't full on tell you, but become clear after some analysis. And fortunately for you, I have already done that work for you, so all you need to do is kick back and listen. Oh, and beware of spoilers. Don't watch this if you don't want to be spoiled on the ending. Let's begin with this game's new buzzword, Prime Energy. It may sound like a drink that will have kids moving at twice their normal speed, but it's actually a word used to describe the power of the Triforce. Although, not sure if you've noticed this, because while the Triforce does make its very first appearance since A Link Between Worlds, it goes unnamed. Now, that is not unheard of. There have been plenty of games where it goes unnamed, but still appears in some fashion within the game, like Twilight Princess and even Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, where the symbol is still often seen. What is a lot rarer though is for the Triforce to appear in literal form, as the 3 golden triangles we all know, and still not be called by name. Even when the 3 pieces are divided between Link, Zelda and Null, is their power referred to as Prime Energy. It begs the question, why? What is that meant to convey to us players? Well, one very important thing to note regarding that wording is that the goddesses themselves use it as well, meaning that the word Triforce just flat out doesn't exist in this version of Hyrule. The goddesses here never made the Triforce, they made Prime Energy, and the Guardians of the Realm, the Tri, which, confusingly enough, obviously still share their name with the first 3 letters of Triforce. Now, this could potentially have some serious implications. After all, it may suggest it's actually the Hylians who came up with the word Triforce, possibly inspired by one of their saviors, the little dude known as Tri. If that's the case, then Echoes of Wisdom would have to be quite early in whatever timeline it ends up falling into, because even in Skyward Sword, where Hyrule isn't even inhabited yet, the word Triforce is used. Then again, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom have been confirmed to exist in their own timeline, separate from the rest. So the same could apply to Echoes of Wisdom as either its own standalone timeline or connected with the other Switch games, although in that case, being much later than Tears of the Kingdom would make more sense than being before it. And since Tears of the Kingdom doesn't feature the Triforce or Prime Energy at all, that would also be a possibility, although we are getting off track here a little. But speaking of connections to other Zelda games, there is one that I feel must be acknowledged, and that is the last top-down Zelda before Echoes of Wisdom, A Link Between Worlds. Map-wise, there are some parallels so obvious that people picked up on them way before the game was even released. It's not a one-to-one copy, there are things altered here and there, like the location of Link's house and Death Mountain being west, but it's clear the intention is there to make this version of Hyrule resemble the ones from A Link Between Worlds, and as such, also A Link to the Past. Nothing illustrates that better than the presence of the ruins of the Desert Palace from A Link to the Past being present in Echoes of Wisdom's Gerudo Desert. They have been almost entirely lost to time though, so if they're meant to be in the same timeline, a ton of time has passed since at least the SNES game. Anyway, simply put, the map of Echoes of Wisdom is an expanded version of the one from the 2 earlier games, but that is not where the connections end. We are heading into speculation territory here, but as the game revealed, Null was originally kept at bay by the existence of Hyrule, Prime Energy and the Tri, I was waiting for it to be explained what changed that allowed Null to kick off its plan. After all, why does it do it now, instead of much earlier in Hyrule's existence? We know this Hyrule isn't new or anything, plenty of characters speak of old tales and legends, so what stopped Null before? And well, the game never explains that. It's never mentioned how Null was capable of kicking off its plan, even though the constraints the goddesses had put on it were still in place. But then you go back to the connection between Echoes of Wisdom and A Link Between Worlds. For those that have never played that game or have since forgotten, A Link Between Worlds 2 deals with a land swallowed by evil, although those were more literal holes than rifts in space and time in that title. It also didn't happen to Hyrule, but Lorule, its counterpart from the Dark World. But what is very important in all this is that a possible reason that all happened to Lorule is because they destroyed their Triforce, i.e. the Prime Energy and the Tries, which is the biggest constraint put on Null. Is it possible this act is what allows Null to begin his plans? That Lorule accidentally removes the things holding Null in place? After all, he is some sort of cosmic being, existing beyond space and time, so if he can access Hyrule, he could also access Lorule, should it exist. The same also applies to the Tri, I would say. They were created by the goddesses as invisible guardians intrinsically linked to the power of the Triforce, which Lorule has. And throughout the final dungeon and cutscenes of Echoes of Wisdom, both Null and the many Tri appear with imagery resembling that of DNA strands, almost to say they are the thing that holds the world together, the DNA that it is built on. If that's the case, Lorule would not be an exception, and would also have its own Tri to protect it, and either its own or the same Null threatening it. At which point, destroying the Triforce allows him to be set free to create not only problems in Lorule, but also Hyrule, as we see in Echoes of Wisdom. Little sidestep or fact if you will, but what I really like about Echoes of Wisdom's origin story for the familiar powers is that it's the first game that explains why Hyrule even exists. Even Skyward Sword, which is the source of a ton of knowledge about these kind of things, didn't answer that question, but Echoes of Wisdom does. Hyrule itself is created to fill the void that Null thrived in. It's a little thing, not super important, but I thought it was neat. Next, I want to zoom in more on Null, and its plans specifically, because there are some intricacies here that the game does not spell out for you at all, but are very much present. So what is immediately important to know is that Null initially does not know what is keeping it at bay. It doesn't know about Prime Energy, not until it possesses the King of Hyrule and learns the same information the king later tells his daughter. It doesn't know about the sanctions of the goddesses either, but more about that later. First, let's start at the beginning. You may have forgotten it by the time that you even hear of Null's existence, but originally its plan was to copy the King of Hyrule and use his influence and power to control the kingdom unchecked. Similar to what we see play out in the Gerudo Desert, where a copy of Advisor Facette uses her influence to allow the rifts to grow. However, at some point before the game starts, Null encounters its first setback. The young boy known as Link has made it its goal to defeat Null. And so, this cosmic entity begins a new phase of its plan, where it attempts to get Link out of the picture. Early on in the game, we're told that the rifts have been swallowing a ton of kids, specifically, which in hindsight seems like attempts of Null to capture Link. Later, it uses his echo of Ganon, more on that later as well, to lure Link into saving Zelda, which is depicted in the intro of the game and leads to Link successfully being swallowed by a rift. Null knew this would work, because it had access to Ganon's memories, just like with the king beforehand, which tell it of their linked destiny. At this point in his plan, Zelda is a complete non-factor to Null. She was a puppet in his plan to lure Link, but not more than that. Not yet, at least. Because that changes after Zelda has cleared 3 dungeons and the entirety of Castletown becomes swallowed by a rift. This happens because Null has realized Zelda too has a role to play. It has since learned for the king not only about the Prime Energy it needs to free itself, but also the sanctions of the goddesses, which it will never be able to obtain itself. But you know who can? Zelda. Null allows Zelda to complete this task for it, then creates an echo of her as soon as she's done so. What I really like about this, and I believe deserves plaudits, is how well thought out his plan is, despite Null itself being a bit of a typical evil mystery entity thing. It all checks out from start to finish. Null even changes his plans along the way as the story develops, so I would definitely call it a positive side of this game. But there was one more thing I want to discuss concerning his plans, and that involves Ganon. So, depending on how you view Echoes, Ganon does or does not appear in this game. While it's not outright confirmed, it's pretty strongly hinted at that the Ganon in this game is an echo, and not real, which immediately begs the question, where did Null get it? Well, that is a question without a true answer. It feels likely that Ganon's spirit was probably lingering out there somewhere beyond the physical plane. Don't forget that Null also resides outside of space and time. If anyone would have access to whatever happens to the spirit of evil that resides in Ganon after he's slain, it would be Null. And that's only because an explanation of it once coincidentally captured Ganon in a rift while he was doing groceries or whatever is even more lame. Though there is also a piece of evidence that suggests the initial Ganon from the first fight may actually be the real deal. While he disappears after the fight in a way almost each and every one of Null's echoes does, his weapon actually remains behind and is sucked into the rift when it opens. This is very abnormal echo behavior, and something we don't ever see again in the game, suggesting that while perhaps Ganon may be an echo, his weapon actually is not at this point in the game. What does that mean? No clue, but it's noteworthy nonetheless. Also important to point out here is that during this first encounter, Ganon has the exact same text box as Null has at the end of the game, further hinting it is indeed an echo. And while I would say that is the final bit of true hidden lore in this video, I do want to point out how it's kinda funny that in-universe, Null might honestly be one of the strongest, most threatening villains Link and Zelda have ever faced, and yet the way he's defeated requires significantly less powerful artifacts and all that. Link's sword is strong, but it's not the Master Sword or anything, and the way Zelda does damage to it is by summoning bang average enemies or even throwing furniture at him for the ultimate disrespect. Makes you wonder why the goddesses didn't just try that, huh? Anyway, let me know what your thoughts on the story and lore of Echoes of Wisdom are. If you enjoyed my takes, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel to stay updated on all my future Zelda content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.